Hello, and welcome to another fully live episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today we had a very internationally famous guest to share with you. And unfortunately, he's not feeling well, so we've got Michael. So Michael is here to join us today to help us out with the news. So Michael, thank you for making time to show up in place of our dear friend Stefan, who unfortunately has a tummy ache.
Oh, poor Stefan.
All right, so everyone wish Stefan's tummy better. But instead, we got Michael, so we're going to roll with it. So Michael, what do you think we should start with in the news today?
I don't know. There's actually like a lot of stuff that has happened in the InfoSec world.
I'm actually pretty impressed. And also hello to Zam and everybody else in the chat, 8-Bit Oni and everyone. Well, I guess that's just 2 people in the chat so far. But both of you are very welcome today to ask questions or otherwise expound on the topics we're going over, because of course we don't know everything about them. And we've got a pretty broad palette today. So I guess we should just get started and dive in.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing I'm probably most excited to talk about is the AirTag stuff.
Yes, AirTags have got a lot of attention this week.
But we don't have to start off with that if we don't want to.
Yeah, so let's start with the one that's at the top of the news just so we can cover it. Let's go ahead and switch to my screen. So obviously this news broke early kind of last week and then has been escalating ever since. One of the biggest U.S. gas line pipelines was compromised, had data stolen, and was also issued a pretty stiff ransom. So it's not currently, I haven't seen it confirmed anywhere officially, like how much was paid or if it was paid or what really is going on with that.
Apparently it was 75 Bitcoin.
Do you have a source for that?
I don't have the article pulled up anymore, but it wasn't one of the articles.
No, that's fine. So we don't at the moment have a source for that, but the story is still developing and causing a lot of headlines, including U.S. Cybercom pledging to go after the organization responsible for this. So that's pretty remarkable. Like, you really have to get a certain level of like Grand Theft Auto stars to get like the U.S. military's version of like, of the cyber police involved in what's happening. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but that breach obviously has been in the news. There's been reports of panic buying, and all of this goes to just show that ransomware is a huge threat out there for everyone, and the effects of ransomware can be unexpected. So, ransomware hitting, for example, your payment systems might be enough to shut down an entire pipeline if they're not able to bill people for the gas they're sending them. So all this stuff is really, really getting a lot of attention. So if you are worried about your business getting hit with ransomware or somewhere that you work, then now might be a good time to have that conversation and see if they have some of the most basic precautions built in, like making sure, like for example, on my macOS computer, I have Patrick Wardle's free tool ransomware installed. And what that does is it warns me when all of a sudden a program starts encrypting a bunch of files, and it gives me the option to shut it down early before it does much damage. There's other sorts of alternatives out there. So yeah, it sucks to see that because ransomware can hit anybody, and it's a big deal when it happens.
And we have 2 of our live streams were on ransomware in the past. So if you have someone in your company and you need to educate them, maybe those are good resources for you.
Right. I even did that Wi-Fi ransomware one where I started as somebody just breaking into like local servers over Wi-Fi. Okay. So another thing I wanted to highlight was I mentioned Sci-Hub a while ago in terms of it being a really good place to access scientific papers. Well, the creator of Sci-Hub has received a subpoena, and that subpoena is interesting for a couple reasons. One, it obviously is going to have a chilling effect on this sort of research and making scientific papers available to the entire scientific community free of charge. The other thing that is notable about it is this was a subpoena sent to Apple. And most people were like, okay, like if you got a subpoena sent to Apple, like what kind of data do they actually have access to? Like Apple really makes a lot of effort to message like privacy and, we want to keep your data secure. So in actual fact, if you do have an Apple device, like what kind of access does Apple have to that? Like what kind of encryption is on the data, and then who has the keys for it? Well, here's a little chart. Basically, Apple can decrypt everything except for the iCloud keychain and a few services that are end-to-end encrypted. So you can see here Safari history and bookmarks, calendars, contacts, Find My Device, iCloud, messages in iCloud, notes, photos, reminders, Siri shortcuts, voice memos, wallets and passes. All these things are accessible by Apple. So this is not, you do not just have the keys to this, they also have the keys to them. And then encrypted things, we have Apple Card transactions, home data, health data, map data, memos, payment information, Wi-Fi password, Siri information, screen time, Safari history, QuickType learned vocabulary. So those are things that are either encrypted on the device or end-to-end. So some kind of upsetting exceptions to that kind of turn people off who are conscious of privacy and also the messaging that Apple's had around privacy. So if you just kind of assume that like through Apple's marketing, everything was going to be encrypted end to end and you were the one that had sole access to this, no. If you were to start some open source project that's trying to do a good thing that ends up running afoul of law enforcement, in fact, there's a lot of data that can be accessed by Apple. So that subpoena might be exposing a lot more than you think. And it's just useful to know if you're having an Apple device in your infrastructure, exactly what kind of information is accessible to really anybody who has the authorization to ask for it. So very interesting case. We'll talk about a couple other interesting cases that are stirring up some debate in the security community. But I am obviously personally, just me, find the service of Sci-Hub to be something really essential because really there's just a bunch of middlemen who are making money by publishing scientific papers that only people that pay can see. It's an industry that a lot of the scientific community really doesn't like, and it seems like they're kind of fighting for their lives at this point. So I don't see this industry really getting very much love, either from the people who write papers or from the people who want to build on them or consume them. So this kind of lawsuit is pretty scary to people who believe that scientific advancements should be available to anybody who wants to try to build on them. That's the point of publishing them in the scientific community. At least that's the thought. Yeah. So, all right, now we're going to get into AirTags. So on May 9th, Stack Smashing posted this fantastic demonstration of changing up the URLs that AirTags are able to produce. Now, this was really an interesting way of repurposing these, but that's not where it stopped this week because there was a lot of other modifications to, let's just say, AirTag's intended use that have cropped up. Michael, do you know any other examples?
So the two examples I know of are using an AirTag as a really slow modem to transfer arbitrary data, and then the second use I saw is someone actually mailing it through the postal service and as a test to see how well it can actually track things, and it actually worked quite well.
Yes.
Which I was like, that's a little concerning, especially when you think about other implications of how that could be used.
Do you want to go to your screen and show this?
Yeah, let me see. So this is the way, if you're not familiar with AirTags, how they work, how their data flow works, is you have basically an ESP32 working in Bluetooth mode that communicates with nearby Apple devices. Those Apple devices then use their cellular connection to connect to a cell tower, and then it goes out through an ISP to the broader internet. I haven't read quite all the details on how they were able to send data and turn that in. I'm assuming they're taking advantage of that protocol and the fact that the keys are publicly available. But yeah, if you're interested in knowing more about this, you can check out this link. I'll drop it in the chat in just a second. But yeah, there's a whole article here on how they've managed to do this. So quite extensive. But yeah, what about you? What have you found that's interesting to cover with AirTags?
Okay, so if we switch to my screen, we can see that Stack Smashing ended up putting out a really good guide on how they had hacked the Apple AirTags. But also I saw a really cool thread. By the way, this is, if you're interested in the nitty gritty of what Michael's talking about, there was an ESP32 update that turns the microcontroller into an upload-only modem. So this is using Apple AirTags to upload arbitrary data and then decode and display the uploaded data. So if you want to check out this project, it's on GitHub. And again, this is really cool research into using these AirTags to, or basically iOS devices to upload data for you. So you could have an iOS device basically work to upload data from some isolated random thing that's just pinging off of anybody who walks by it, which is very sweet. So yeah, you can see this is the same graph as Michael was showing, and you can go ahead and try this out if you want to try it for yourself. I find that to be so absolutely cool to kind of like piggyback off this infrastructure. The way that this is kind of abusing it, I hope that Apple doesn't clamp down too hard, because frankly, like, this kind of stuff is really, really cool.
Yeah, it is certainly abusive, but like as far as like data rates, like what I'm seeing here is 3 bytes a second, and the latency can be as high as 60 minutes.
Well, that's not really the point. The point is more like Apple did not intend for this, nor will they probably approve.
Yeah, yeah, certainly.
So some sort of like privately negotiated key or like something else to like authenticate access to these devices, being able to just broadcast arbitrary data. Because basically, like, the joke I was seeing made in the hacker community was just like, thanks for the free C2, Apple. Because you could basically use random iOS devices to, you know, transmit instructions to, you know, whatever, like a botnet or something like that. And then like the FBI like busts in, they're like, freeze, get on the ground. And it's just like someone's like router or baby monitor that's like gone rogue and is like acting as a point that's like broadcasting out instructions. So like, you know, for all they know, like this baby monitor had like a vulnerability. Somebody found it on Shodan, connected to it over Tor, and then started issuing, you know, like commands to a massive botnet. Like, how do you track that person down? Like, it really becomes pretty difficult when you're able to abuse something like this as a C2 server. So very spooky and very interesting when we're looking at ways that hackers can cover their tracks or abuse infrastructure to do some really interesting stuff. So do you remember when we first talked about AirTags, my first thought was like, you're going to get people stalking other people, you're going to get other sorts of like malicious stuff going on. And the studies that have gone on to further kind of show the behavior as they were at the time, like this might have been changed, was that Apple had built in some anti-abuse things, like starting to have the thing ring if it's around a certain phone for long enough. But here's the thing. When they say phone, they mean iPhone. They don't mean Android phone. So if the person who's being stalked has an Android phone, then there's no automatic functionality to cause that device to ring, because, you know, it's outside of Apple's infrastructure. So they found that you could still effectively put this in a car and have it drive around and whatever. And provided the person who was being like, you know, followed by this device had an Android device instead, like there was no automatic detection, there was no warning for them, and there was no audio warning. So that might have been changed at some point, but like my concern was immediately like, hey, this could be a massive privacy invasion by somebody like sticking it to something and then like otherwise allowing it to do its thing. But you know, there were some other things like the duration of how long it rang, like, and some other things where it just kind of seemed like it could still be abused. So finding out that people have found out ways to abuse it on top of its even intended purpose is just very funny, because it hasn't even been out for that long.
Yeah, and I linked to that blog post in the chat, but also like in that blog post, something they recommend, and I'll show it on my screen.
The one on positive security?
Yeah, it is the things that could be changed is authentication of the BLE advertisement and rate limiting of the location. I'm not 100% sure I'm understanding this correctly, but I think they're talking about that you can also just make, like, buy an ESP32 and make your own device that communicates with the AirTags protocol.
Yeah.
So, like, something that would be very disturbing there is just, like, completely using that, like you were kind of alluding to, making trackers, making other devices. Like,
because it would never ring. Yeah. And it would never really... It shouldn't really be detected.
Yeah, depending on like how they're monitoring that, like if the iPhone is saying, okay, I've been transmitting a lot of messages from this single device through the AirTags network, and then letting you know that it's doing that, but then that could just be like a smart, like, because I see a lot of potential use for, like, you know, smart meters, like for parking, or like telling you if a parking garage is full, stuff like that. But if you lived in that apartment building, your phone would go off all the time telling you, oh, this thing's right here beside you. Yeah. So nuisance alarms would make it very hard for people, I feel like, potentially to be like, oh, someone's actually following me this time.
All right, so let's go ahead and switch over to WhatsApp. I never really used WhatsApp that much, but I know there was a huge exodus when they started sharing their data with Facebook, but they still allowed you to opt out. But guess what opting out gets you? After a few weeks of limited functionality, you can't receive incoming calls or notifications, and WhatsApp will stop sending messages and calls to your phone.
What?
So it basically disables it. So at this point, like, you have two options. You can not use WhatsApp, or you can share your data with Facebook. And if you try to choose that in between, I want to use WhatsApp, but don't send my data to Facebook, they just disable the app for you. It's not really usable anymore. So
So basically, gone the way like Facebook Messenger went, like it just fully integrated now.
Yeah, this is fully integrated now. So like you can just assume that like if you use WhatsApp, provided it's still useful, if Facebook is getting your data, which is not, I would argue to say, maybe not good. So you can make your own decisions, but just know WhatsApp is now fully integrated into Facebook's data collection network, meaning it's learning about you in ways that are creepy and weird. So if you want to make your own decision on that, I would probably want to pick a messenger that isn't desperate to learn everything possibly about you, and hopefully is encrypted end to end.
Yeah, and for the person asking, that's Cody from Nullbyte. He also does videos on Hack5. And then we have our own channel, Redia, and then we live stream here.
What's my shirt was the question. No, it wasn't. It wasn't, but I want to explain the shirt anyway. So we're doing an episode on Hack5 about facial recognition and defeating it. And some of the things that have come out since our last episode were a facial recognition defeating search. So I guess like this just like tries to convince you can't really see the bottom, but it kind of looks
like a landscape.
It looks like we're in a market, maybe buying a salmon. So like it tries to convince So the theory here is that if you take a bunch of stuff that machine learning strongly associates with a certain thing, then it will match like 98% positive to this certain thing, and then as a human or as a person to then do further facial analysis on it doesn't identify it correctly. So this obviously only works against very certain types of facial recognition, and like I have very low confidence that this is going to be very effective. But hey, yeah, this is theoretically supposed to protect your privacy by making cameras misidentify you as like a market with some salmon, or like I don't really understand like what this is trying to do exactly. But there was another one I had that also looked very much like it was trying to make you look like a marble, so that like, you know, it's just like, oh no, it's just a marble rolling through the store, don't scan that, like don't try to identify that guy's face, it's just a marble.
Before you go away from the WhatsApp thing, someone's asking about Telegram. Do you think Telegram is still a messenger service that you would use or recommend?
I don't use Telegram personally. I would recommend Signal, like that's what I use. But Telegram has a couple things I don't like as much, but I don't have any specific gripes about it off the top of my head. I just know when in the past I've had a moment to sit down and think and make the decision, I've always ended up with Signal. So that being said, Signal is not an all-in-one solution. None of these are. Michael and I were having a combination about how like Gboard, the default keyboard, is sending information to Google, which somebody can get with a subpoena.
Right.
So like you could be using Signal, but it's still very possible to retrieve at least one half of your conversations. So like this is just like a privacy and security issue that each person has to approach themselves. But personally, I like to use Signal because I think it's better than Telegram when it comes to some of the trade-offs it makes.
Yeah, and that's where I always ask people about, like, what's your threat model? Like, what are you trying to protect yourself against? And then make a judgment from that.
Oh, yeah. So speaking of things that are not an all-in-one for security, Michael, have you used Tor before?
I might have used Tor once or twice.
Okay. Have you used Tor in the last year or so?
No. I'm the worst hacker ever.
Okay. How many times have you used Tor in maybe the last 4 years?
Probably a handful of times.
Give me a number.
5 times.
Okay, 5 times. Then if you use Tor 5 times, you have almost like 100% chance of having been connected to a malicious node. At one point, this group that has been attacking the Tor network by connecting a bunch of malicious nodes and then doing SSL stripping, was able to get up to 23%. And then after that, they got up to 27% of all Tor relays. So that means like if you're using Tor, you have an extremely high chance of being connected to this group, which is then attempting to downgrade the security of your connection as much as possible and sniff all of the traffic, possibly also injecting malicious traffic into it. So what that means is if you are trying to connect to a website, they are trying to use whatever exploits they can to downgrade your traffic security with whatever website you're connecting with. So whatever the lowest amount of security that website is willing to accept in order to be backwards compatible with older devices, that is what they will try to lower the connection to. So if they were not interfering with your traffic, you would be able to connect to these websites relatively securely, and they wouldn't be able to sniff your traffic because it would be using modern SSL. However, if they are able to successfully downgrade that so that it is not protected or the encryption is very weak and breakable, then it means that they can successfully sniff all the traffic that's going through a Tor relay, which is a very scary prospect.
Yeah.
So this isn't going to work against every website, but it will make your traffic overall much more vulnerable. And it's like a startling thing to think about that 27% of all Tor nodes were effectively being part of use for this malicious like network that was attempting to sniff anybody who might be doing anything interesting on the Tor network.
It's one of those ironic situations where by trying to be more secure, you actually inadvertently make yourself less secure.
Yeah, so obviously the Tor, the group that like manages the Tor network was very not happy about this and took action to kind of reduce it as it was caught, but it's still an ongoing threat. So just know that if you're using the Tor network, this is a very successful tactic if you are a group that has the resources to pull it off. Obviously, there are a couple groups that do have the resources to pull it off. Yeah. So this is an attack that we expect to see, on any kind of private network, provided it gets popular enough. If you can basically establish a bunch of nodes and then start poisoning the connections, there's all sorts of malicious things you can do.
Yeah. So what do we got up next?
Moodle. So if
Moodle.
you use Moodle or know someone who uses Moodle, you should contact them now because there's a cross-site scripting vulnerability that is, as far as I'm aware, like still vulnerable for up to 50,000 websites. So that's not good. And so Moodle is something that people use as a backend, and unfortunately, there is a JavaScript issue where you can just pop up, if you want to demonstrate that this is actually an issue, you can pop up on the example website this JavaScript alert and just arbitrarily, do pop-ups or other sorts of things on the website. So this is this is a very widespread vulnerability, and for whatever reason, it's just not being patched very quickly. So if you operate a Moodle server, if you know someone who does, then this is probably something you want to jump on patching. So I also like to point out good resources, and I have 3 really good educational resources today. One of them is geolocation. Geolocation is something that OSINT people have to do all the time. They'll be getting a small video clip or something else that was shared where they have to figure out where it happened. So a lot of the time, this can be a very valuable skill to develop. And if you want to check it out, I have this on my Twitter. But this was Ben Doe Brown posted this great guide on using available mapping data to find out exactly where someone is in a photo or a video. I am not very good at this, so watching somebody else be so good at it was really amazing to me, like what it's possible to do if you have a general idea of where someone might be. So some of these tools are really excellent and cool, and you would probably benefit from checking it out. Let me see. Oh, so my second educational resource was our friend Malware Tech blog went ahead and made one of his first videos, and people keep commenting on how soothing his voice is over and over. Right?
Oh yeah, that is.
Marcus does have a very like deep, soothing voice.
Yeah.
Oh wait, okay, it's playing in both. But yeah, so so he went through and basically showed how to, like, if you have a very, very simple C program, how to start reversing it and find the entry point to the program and why it's not as intuitive as you might think. So if you've ever thought about reversing and getting started with reversing, I've been constantly like telling him over the last couple of years that like doing a beginner thing on reversing would be really eye-opening and really cool. So I'm super glad that he's doing it, and you guys should definitely subscribe to his channel if you like it, because he's going to be doing more of these, and I want to encourage him to keep doing them because I think reversing is really hard to get into, especially if you don't have much of a programming background. But he does a great job of explaining this, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it's also like a 6-minute and 29-second video. So like you definitely have time to learn how to reverse a basic C program that you yourself write. And again, there is a little bit of a twist to it, but once you learn it, it's not that complicated, and I feel like I could explain it to another person. So like I think it was a good video for anybody who has never done this sort of thing before. Because I have done a little bit of like C++ programming a while ago, but it was like a long while ago, and I was still able to follow along with this very well.
What's the name of his YouTube channel?
It is Marcus Hutchkins, which yeah. So yeah. And I also linked to this in my Twitter if you want to check it out. But yeah, so let's see. Oh yeah, so he's done like a couple, and then he also has a couple explainers. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out because it was one of the better references I saw. So, all right, one thing I wanted to point out, if you guys haven't seen it, is we did a video after a little startle where my keyboard, for whatever reason, had a keylogger attached to it. Now, it seems to turn out that it was an accident, but I wanted to investigate and make sure that it wasn't doing anything funky. So Michael and I sat down and did a full analysis to see if we could intercept the Wi-Fi traffic coming from it and start to decode it. So we actually found a small bug where we found that the device will save previously connected networks and actually connect to like both the old network and whatever network you're currently telling it to connect to. And we also found that it is possible to intercept all the traffic and see basically what this is doing, if it's streaming over UDP or if it is sending out over email. Now we didn't go through trying to like decode the SMTP connection, but we were able to demonstrate that we could see it was exfiltrating data over email, and we could actually read all the UDP traffic it was sending at the in real time, which was really interesting. So if you haven't seen it, if you ever find a keylogger, especially a Wi-Fi keylogger, and you want to find out what it's doing, or if you want to just figure out like, you know, what network it's connecting to or what kind of behavior it is doing, we do a nice little guide on using Wireshark to decode the information and also figure out, you know, where it's connecting to and like who might be responsible. Although we also found out a sneaky way that a hacker could cover their tracks by sending a UDP stream to something on the network that's innocent and then sitting back and just intercepting the UDP stream as it is sent out to some like unrelated innocent device on the network that we're effectively trying to point the blame at. So if somebody were to go in and start analyzing the keylogger and find out it's sending all this data to like your roommate's computer, for example, then you know, it might appear that that person was the one who had keylogged you, where in fact your other roommate or your neighbor or whatever might be sitting back and intercepting those packets while, you know, like the packets aren't actually going anywhere, but UDP doesn't care.
So, Zam has a really good idea. Jonty should implement TLS on the UDP stream.
Yeah. I mean, I that's a good suggestion. Yeah. I would agree. I think that it's the problem is the burden on the client. So right now, this is really good for beginners because you can start up Netcat, and you can basically use Netcat to immediately pull down this information. And all you need to do is like one command, and all of a sudden you're locally broadcasting. Or if you put this on like a server, you know, you're one command away from being able to remotely keylog someone. As soon as you start requiring like a cipher or something else, then suddenly like you have to do some configuration on the client side that a beginner might not know. So, you know, I think that this is designed to like just make it as easy as possible at the slight sacrifice that like it becomes clear over the network what is being broadcasted. And like somebody who's doing network monitoring has a much better chance of detecting this because they can see as they're typing that UDP packets are like flowing, and then when they stop, it stops. And then when they read the whole flow of the packets, like that's just what I typed. Like, so like this definitely allows a defender to have a chance at understanding what's going on. And yeah, like maybe if you could do some sort of like optional transportation layer security, like that would be nice. But like setting that up is just like not always for beginners. So I mean, but something at least like base 64ing it like would probably work. Like I think we could base 64 it and be a little bit better off because at least it's an extra button to click on Wireshark. Like, well, it would still read it though.
Just any kind of obfuscation or like encryption would be nice, even if it's just like an optional thing that you can, you know, do a checkbox or something.
Yeah, well, I think that also if you like generated an SSH key or like something like that and then dropped it onto, you know, the drive because it's able to turn into a USB drive, like something like that might be a way you could get around the complexity of setting up you know, transportation layer security. But it is a good point. Like you have a hacking tool that's broadcasting in at least one of the methods that it's going to use totally in the clear. So like it does raise the possibility that somebody could intercept that. There's other ways of getting around it. Like if you connected to the device remotely, like with a directional antenna, and then you were just exchanging data with it over an encrypted network, basically the defender would have to like hack that network. But they would also be able to see that suddenly there was an access point that had sprung up like very, very close to them, and that, you know, that was suspicious, and that it was also exchanging data on a continuous basis. And also, you know, they could see that like when they're typing on the keyboard, it's sending packets, and then when they
Right.
stop, it stops. So there's like some degree of correlation they could still do, even if they couldn't see the contents of the packets. But anyway, this was a good episode. Finding a weird device in your house that's like connecting over Wi-Fi to like exfiltrate data. What do you do? Well, I actually felt like our response was pretty good, so we made an episode about it, and you guys should check it out because it's great. And if you want to check it out, you can go to hackingwithfriends.com or to SecurityFWD on YouTube.
It's like you got that memorized.
Yeah, right. So our good friend Matthew Van Hoff, who's done multiple interviews and a podcast with us because he's a cool guy. And in fact, we also just released a Hack 5 video where he was explaining how WPA3 can be hacked. He's in the news again. Big surprise. So when Matthew Van Hoff finds a vulnerability, it's not like, oh no, like the iPhone is vulnerable. It's just like, oh no, 1 billion Wi-Fi devices are vulnerable. So like this is like the consequence of being a researcher that works on something so fundamental as Wi-Fi. A lot of the times his discoveries like affect like every known Wi-Fi device. And this is one of those cases. Now, okay, this is pretty complicated for people that don't know a lot about how Wi-Fi works, but basically there's some flaws that are pretty straightforward that are, depending on the device, can be pretty devastating. So one of the flaws that I like the most is that there are certain IoT devices that have programming errors in the way they've implemented Wi-Fi. And what this means is they will accept a plain text packet, so an unencrypted packet. So you could just send it a command basically, totally unencrypted, even though it's connected to an encrypted Wi-Fi network and it's only supposed to be listening to that. And you can still inject a packet such that it will obey that packet and do whatever its API allows you to do. Now, what does that mean? Well, if this is a smart switch, then you could turn it off and turn it on. If it's a smart door, like doorbell or door lock, you could probably open the door. This is bad.
Spooky.
Like, yeah, so like the thing here is it depends on what the device allows you to do over like a local network, and it also depends on the device as to whether or not it's implemented this in the wrong way. But the problem here is it gives the potential for you to punch through layers of security with Wi-Fi and do some pretty startling things. So if you haven't checked it out, the details are at fragattacks.com.
And I've linked that in the chat as well.
Yes, and this is a very big deal for Wi-Fi devices. You're going to find this weaponized and integrated into other tools very soon, I believe, and I will happily report on them when we do. In fact, me and Stefan were talking about implementing some of these IoT devices into future versions of the dauthor. Isn't that cool? Oh, sorry, we've got Michael. But anyway, so we've been talking about using the ESP8266 dauthor or future ESP32 versions to detect vulnerable devices and offer the ability to basically remote control them or override them to do things that are interesting, like maybe skip a song on like a Sonos player or turn on or off a stream on a webcam. That would all be very interesting. So you can go through and read this. There's plenty of demonstrations about exactly how this works. There's lots of different flaws and kind of included in this. And Matthew is very good at communicating this stuff. So I think perhaps when all the hubbub like dies down and CNN stops requesting him, we'll maybe have him on and explain this a little bit further and maybe even do a Hack 5 episode on it because it's certainly getting a lot of attention. But yeah, so again, this is a series of flaws. So another one that I haven't covered yet is you can also use this ability to communicate with a device that shouldn't be basically allowed to talk to you to get it to switch to a malicious DNS server. As soon as it does this, you can start manipulating the traffic in all sorts of interesting ways. And it's a really interesting example of how you can, with a couple of packets, have a very serious impact on the way that a network is structured. Like DNS is very kind of tricky in that it's able to override a lot of the settings that have been already built in. And if you're able to trick a IoT device into connecting to a malicious DNS server or even just devices on a local network, you can really do a lot of damage. What's so funny, Chuckles?
Oh, that's great. People were just commenting on how you're mean to me and they enjoy it.
Oh. I would never do that, guys. Yeah, so a lot of these are just based on implementation flaws, and what that means is like I didn't know this until I spoke with Matthew like many times. But Wi-Fi is kind of like a series of suggestions, and people, that being manufacturers, can choose to implement this in a variety of different ways. they can just straight up drop some of these optional requirements, and they can include ones that don't make sense or are implemented incorrectly. And this happens all the time. And these sorts of implementation problems are super widespread and typically have very serious like implications. So that's why like I love watching Matthew's research. He'll like discover something, we'll like Twitter direct message about it, and then like I'll be like, that's interesting. And then like 8 months later, he'll be like, I haven't been allowed to talk about this publicly, but it turns out like 3 billion Wi-Fi devices are vulnerable. And I'm like, wow, like, okay, like that seems extremely serious.
Yeah.
So, check this out if you haven't already. The technical details are fascinating. I'm going to try to have Matthew on at some point to explain all this stuff because there's a lot here, and a lot of it hasn't really been fully weaponized yet because there's been some attempt to push out patches. But of course, these devices typically don't do automatic updates or are kind of a pain to get to update themselves. So you'll find that a lot of these vulnerabilities will be sticking around with us for quite some time.
Yeah, and something else I'd like to see him talk about, more so than just like the specific vulnerability, is his process of finding these vulnerabilities. Like, how does he go through the Wi-Fi stack and actually analyze all of these things? Because like when you look at the white paper, like these are very like niche particular aspects of the protocol. So I would love to hear from him on how he actually goes about finding those.
Yeah, Matthew's a huge nerd and loves, just like I do, like figuring out how like signals can like leak data. So like the way that he's managed to figure this out, he's just like so good at that. And the way that he explains it to beginners also, like I find a lot of researchers are quite difficult to understand when they really get into their subject. But Matthew's research papers are, you know, if you know just a tiny bit about networking, very, very digestible and are pretty eye-opening because I had no idea how messed up Wi-Fi was. Frankly, I thought it was like a monolithic thing that everybody did the same, but the smallest implementation errors can really cause disproportionate security effects when it comes to the entire rest of the device. So there's a lot of like cases of just being able to straight up break into otherwise extremely secure devices through the way that they configure or implement Wi-Fi. So really fascinating work, and probably if you're going to take anything away from this, go and watch that particular thing because it will probably impact a device that you own. Could be an IoT device, it could be a laptop, it could be a cell phone. Hopefully cell phones and laptops have already been patched by now, but IoT devices could lag behind, and it's worth thinking about like, what if someone took control of my smart door lock? What if someone turned off the smart switch? Would it cause a problem? You know, like, so these are some interesting debates worth having with yourself if you find a device that could still be vulnerable to these attacks.
Yeah,
So,
like minor side tangent there, that's always been a concern of mine with smart homes, is as these things, like, you know, ESPs get built into buildings and they're intended to be there for like a decade or more. How do those things get patched and updated over the time? Especially, you know, if you're in a renter situation or like the building gets bought by someone, like they may not even realize that thing is there or they'll forget about it. So there's certainly a lot of security concerns there that I think we should think more about, like the longevity of some of these products and how we get them updated.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right, so that is a whole lot. Let's go into the Chicago Police Department. So there's all sorts of ways that police departments can make purchases, and some of the sketchiest ways are from asset forfeitures. This is stuff where police just straight up take things, like during investigations.
Your stuff is mine now.
Yeah, and what they do with them is kind of up to them.
Yeah.
So this is, in my personal opinion, very sketchy, and it's often used to purchase things that wouldn't look good using taxpayer money for, including, I don't know, a secretive drone program that no one was consulted about. So this kind of like off the books purchase to kind of avoid the whole debate around whether or not this is proper is exactly the way that you get a huge scandal. So I don't know, like I would probably feel kind of like this was disingenuous in approaching the community and seeing if they're cool with being surveilled by this stuff if you're just using a bunch of off-the-books money to buy it. But this is definitely a story worth checking out if you want to see how your own local police department might get around the debate around this sort of aerial surveillance by just buying the stuff with money that isn't really accountable to anyone.
Yeah, which is pretty sketchy.
Yes.
But I do think it's an inevitability that drones end up getting used more and more in policing. And also I've seen them used a lot in like fire, in EMS.
That's a private industry.
Yeah.
That's a private industry though.
Fire departments?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. So very often, if you are looking for a job and you maybe get sick in airplanes, as I found out yesterday, you can get a job as a drone pilot. And these drone pilots fly the same drones that like the U.S. military uses, but outfitted with sensors. They fly private border patrol missions. They fly for firefighting missions, and there are tons of these commercial pilots in the United States. So like, I don't really think it's necessary for like the because like sure, whatever, the fire department has it, but like, do the police need it? Well, that should be they are supposed to serve the community. So like, maybe ask the community if they want to be in 4K nude sunbathing in their backyard because somebody committed like a misdemeanor 5 blocks away. Do you want that? Is that a fair trade? Like, a lot of people would say no. They would prefer to continue nude sunbathing in their backyard and not have that used as evidence in court like a while later. It's a debate worth having, and like taking that away from people because it might be an inevitability. It's like the private market will find a way. Like, you know, like if you have a need for drone footage, I'm sure some guy with a drone, provided they're given the right license, will be able to deliver it for you at a much less cost than buying your own stuff. So, you know, these sorts of things, like, if you need to have the debate about it, you need to fully engage the community that's going to be impacted by it, because we know where these things are typically used. They're typically used in high crime areas, which also tend to be low income and also tend to be non-white. So like, this sort of thing is it doesn't really affect everybody in the same way. So getting around the debate where you don't have to face the people who are going to be under this thing, like, that just seems like the worst possible way of introducing this sort of program.
Yeah.
It's very sad. But anyway, let's go on to something that's wonderful. How about this 3D printed wind gauge? That's the whole story. If you want to check out this awesome 3D printed wind gauge, it only needs a skateboard ball bearing, which is an 8mm ball bearing, in order to work. And it can be outfitted with an automatic sensor to be able to actually read how fast it's going, if you so desire, which I probably will be doing at some point. But this was a fun print. So if you have access to a 3D printer, or if you just want to make something that is awesome, I linked to the Thingiverse design on here, and it is a lot of fun. This is the least frustrating thing I've worked on all week. So if you need a palette cleanser and have access to a 3D printer, you can get these ball bearings for super cheap, and they work really well for a long time. So
one of our viewers is warning you about crashing your drone into a tree, which is what he did. They did.
I think I shared video of me full on slamming into a tree at about 30 miles per hour, and the drone flipped over right over a glacial lake, and then like hovered maybe 3 feet above the water. My drone is already dead. But the Chinese algorithm inside refused to die for my insolence. So because it wouldn't sacrifice itself and thought my hubris wasn't worth dying for, it took control of the drone and prevented the crash. That's all I can say.
That's what you pay the big bucks for.
Yeah, my drone is already forfeit as far as I'm concerned. I've already like done things that should have killed it. But I will say, yesterday I found out that the maximum elevation that I've been flying at for the last 6 months is a slider that was nestled behind 2 menus, and it's been at the lowest position. So I didn't know that, and it turns out I can quadruple the altitude I fly at just by moving it a little bit. So that's why you read the manual.
Yeah, I was gonna say I definitely want to look into that for like a live stream, as like ways these quadcopters can be hacked and stuff like that. So if y'all know anything about that, drop me some links in the chat.
Cool. So all right, we've already talked about air tags. I'm almost tired of air tags. So we're going to skip through these.
And
we've got lots of stuff to talk about.
I was going to say we're almost out of time.
Oh, no, we've got 15 minutes. So, hey guys, is this good? Just wanted to throw this one out there. Is this good if this happens to your 3D printer? If like hot yellow plastic starts erupting out of the top of it? Because it keeps happening to me when I use these $15 Amazon replacements. So I'm assuming this has maybe, I don't know, another like week to live as it starts gushing plastic out of the top of it. But, yeah, I gotta love those $15 replacements, huh?
That's what you want your 3D printer to do, be a geyser of hot
plastic.
It
might not be pretty, but this is what peak performance looks like. You may not like it, but you have to acknowledge it. I mean, it seems to be printing normally for now, but obviously it's gonna fail spectacularly pretty soon. If anybody knows what that is, feel free to tell me on Twitter, and maybe I'll stop buying these parts or actually fix the problem. But for $15 every like 4 weeks of this cropping up, I almost don't care. All right, so one thing worth checking out is the Biden administration is putting out some new guidelines for federal networks and other government-affiliated networks in terms of cybersecurity. I'm actually startled that this wasn't already a thing. Some of the recommendations in here are really good and would cause some very positive changes, and it's definitely worth checking out. So you can find the full article on whitehouse.gov. I'm not going to go all the way through it because it is long, but it is something that I think is a really good first initial step towards having some guidelines for the way that federal or government websites are administered, because there are some glaring holes here that makes them unnecessarily easy targets, and some of these things just have to get fixed. It's just not an option to leave them open anymore or use some of these terrible practices. So hopefully this will be the kick in the pants that actually allows some of these things to really go through.
Yeah.
All right, so how do you bypass Windows Defender?
Wait.
You wait 20 seconds. So this is a demo of how Mimikatz is able to bypass Windows Defender detection by just waiting 20 seconds. And after that window, then I guess it stops looking for malicious behavior, and you can just do whatever the heck you want. So this was a pretty hilarious demo. If you want to check out this, you can look at Gentle Kiwi to find some more information. But yeah, just generally not a good way to secure your system if somebody can get around it in 20 seconds.
I just feel like that's like one of the most low-key hacker exploits ever, is just go slower.
Yeah, oh my god. Yeah.
Like, that has actually worked in many different regards when I've been doing research before. If you just do something a little slower, sometimes you get interesting results.
Just under rate limit, yeah. So we also want to introduce our sometimes co-host, James. He is now, look at this, he's on Hack 5. Isn't that amazing? So it was great getting him debuted on this really big channel, 700 and some thousand subscribers, and his first episode has been really popular. So if you haven't checked it all out already, his episode on CubesOS is a great starter episode. I think we're going to have him do a follow-up one as well. So check him out on the Hack 5 channel. It's so great because he started out here on SecurityFWD, and now he's on the Big Boy channel. So it's so wonderful to see him grow up. So both he and our also sometimes co-host Nick have both gone on Hack 5 recently, and their episodes are doing extremely well. I think Nick's is at like 70,000 views in just like a week or so.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been really great to get such a wonderful reception for them from the hacking and security community. So if you haven't checked it out already, their episodes are great and short. They're like 17 minutes each. So if you want to get a shorter bite of the information rather than spending a whole hour with us.
If you want a hack bite.
Yeah, if you want a hack bite, because that's the name of the new show, then you can check out this new show that we did.
Yeah, and before you move on, like, Cubes is honestly one of the OSs I definitely recommend if you are concerned about, like, security. It's a little hardcore, but, you know, if you're super concerned.
Yeah,
definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's a really good starter. So I donated today to Tilly Notman's fundraiser, just because as a fellow security researcher, if you don't know the story behind this, Tilly is being indicted, I guess, by U.S. authorities for being part of some of the leaks that have happened, but a lot of the charges that were brought are also incredibly, I guess we would call them like chilling for the security community. Did you know that if you do a DEF CON talk, or if you get around a Twitter ban by creating a new account, you can be charged with wire fraud? I didn't.
No, yeah, I always thought that was like bank hacking type stuff, but apparently I'm wrong.
Right. So conspiracy to commit computer fraud, like there's a lot of stuff here that like researchers do all the time, and if this becomes normal to prosecute someone for crimes like creating a new Twitter account, like this is a problem. So this is something worth checking out. The ongoing case against distributed denial of secrets and people affiliated with them tends to not attract as much attention as some of these other cybersecurity stories. So again, I'm not acting in official capacity of anything. This is just me personally. I find some of these charges to be really overreaching and sketchy, and probably, again, will have a chilling effect on the researcher community. So if you're a researcher, if you're a hacker, and you feel like some of these things could happen to you, this is definitely something worth keeping an eye on to see how this case goes and whether any of these could set precedents for the way that security researchers are treated when handling data breaches.
Yep.
Stay punk. All right, another great, my third and final great source of information.
More OSINT.
Yeah, is OSINT information. So what happens if you go full buck on privacy? If you really go and take all of the recommendations that Mike Bazell gives you, then what happens?
Delete the internet.
Well, Okay. So Mike Vazell has a great podcast where he talks about OSINT, and in this most recent one, he talks about the weird things that can come up once you start trying to be more private and more secure, and what can happen when you start limiting the amount of information that's out there about you on purpose. So this is definitely worth a listen if you've ever fantasized about what it would be like to disappear from the internet, because this man has basically built a career on doing so, and finding out all the weird things that has caused is something that I think most people wouldn't really get to experience. So I was really fascinated by this, and you might want to check it out. You can go to inteltechniques.com/podcast in order to see it, and I also have it retweeted on my Twitter at Cody Kinsey. Next up, okay, so I wanted to share how the hacker community kind of stands on each other's shoulders in order to pull off stuff like the air tag hack. So this is a group of researchers that started out with one researcher, Colin O'Flynn, writing up and sharing notes on map point testing. And then another hacker taking that, and that's the one that we were talking about, stack smashing, and doing all the things that they did with putting out arbitrary URLs and otherwise being able to get into the firmware and do a bunch of glitching stuff and dumping the firmware. Then somebody took that write-up that hacker made and went even further.
Did a write-up on the write-up's write-up.
Yeah, and used a JStegger, which I barely know what that is, to show all anybody who wants to how to attach it to test points and read back all of the flash memory. So like,
wait. I always thought that was like a custom PCB they did to connect to it.
I think that parts of that are custom PCBs.
Yeah.
But this is just an example of how like one person finding something, making a write-up or a video on it, and then another person standing on their shoulders. Like that's really how we do things. Like nobody like just from a static point of nothing just like breaks in and figures out how to do everything. It's all people coming together and working on these like one great like CTF, I guess, or one great challenge that allows us to find the sorts of things these can really be used for in the real world and be on the bleeding edge of what people are doing with this stuff. So I think it's really cool how these people all helped each other out and focused on making sure that it wasn't some like secret how they did it. They wanted to make it so other people could use skills that they don't have to innovate even further than they were able to. And it's that documentation and sharing, I think, that makes the hacker community so cool. So just shout out to all those researchers who kind of helped each other out with this, because I love seeing collaboration, and the results here were super, super cool. All right, now I have some gossip. This is all unconfirmed, but it seems like coincidentally after US Cybercom was given the green light to go after the dark side hackers after they posted this non-apology, I guess, their Onion site has been disconnected, and they recently posted on a ransomware forum that they've lost control of their infrastructure and somebody took all their money. So that's weird. Yeah, so again, this is unconfirmed. This is just some stuff that has come up from other people in the community. But yeah, that sucks, but is very predictable.
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't really suck. It sucks for them. I should be very clear here. Okay, and then the last piece that I have is we've got some. Oops. My system is running out of memory. Should I close Firefox? No, I'm just going to put this in the corner. So basically, we have another vulnerability that's being exploited by some piece of malware. In this case, it's specifically made for Apple's new MacBook Pros. So that's pretty spooky. And this was also notarized by Apple, so there's no real way for a normal person to detect this. But you will be able to detect this typically via one of Patrick Wardle's tools on objectivec.com. But this is pretty spooky. It was delivered by some malware that basically just tries to get you to download something you shouldn't be downloading. But once you open it, it persists as like a startup item and will continuously launch itself and do all sorts of bad things. So really, there's some unknown things that they don't really know what it's doing yet here. So it's not really known who is distributing this. This campaign has been going on for a while, but currently isn't being well detected by standard sorts of defenses. So I think it's getting like 0 on virus total at the moment. So yeah, the active malware that's targeted at the M1 MacBooks is definitely something that is interesting, especially when it's notarized by Apple. So So looks like my computer doesn't want me to do the stream anymore after transmitting 30 gigabytes of data to you guys. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna close this and hope this doesn't crash. But we're done. So that's it. That's all we got today, you guys. I think we'd still have like 6 minutes, so I'm gonna go ahead and go back and check the chat. But if you guys have any questions about what we went over today,
I've been trying to feed you most of the questions that were in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a couple, like a question about a router that I don't know what they were asking.
yeah. Well, anyway, there's lots of stuff that happened this week. CR30 update. I still can't print anything that's not a blob of goop or included in the card that came with the thing. So I'll let you guys know when I get that particular 3D printer working. But overall, I think it's really funny how people have dogpiled on the AirTag. Like, it was like a controversial idea from the start. As soon as I heard of it, I was like, wow, it sounds like somebody who's domestic abusing someone could really enjoy using one of those.
I mean, like, the concept of using a network of smartphones to transmit data, I think, is an intriguing idea. But I think this implementation is ripe with vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and do you think that maybe those like little nodes that are going everywhere and reporting back should maybe have like an opt-in?
Yeah, no, that's what I was gonna say. Is like,
I think that it's funny that like Apple's just like, now in order to share data with Facebook, you get to opt in, and they're like, cool. But by the way, your phone is now a beacon, and anybody can arbitrarily upload data to it. And I was
well,
like, what?
so like the two things I would want to see is I would want to see a pop-up notification where it gives you yes, no, I want to opt in for this, and then also I would want. I don't know how it currently works, but I would want to see that Apple is the one paying for that mobile data. I know it's not going to be much mobile data, but like over time, that could be an amount
it's just
of
like
mobile data.
a lot of a lot of the time, like I'll find a guest network that's like a carrier guest network, like a like that's designed for AT&T people or whatever, and this will be like the AT&T will be a telecom that will like rent the router to a business and then allow part of that router's capacity to like let random people in the area who also have AT&T accounts connect back to it. Now the problem is like once you're connected to the router, you can do certain things,
right?
And like it tries to they try to lock it down, but often they don't update these very often, or there's flaws in the way that things are implemented, and these can be used as a way to break into a router, which then allows you access to the same router some business is using, and they never signed up to let random guests use it, or they might not even be aware. So it's really like the small print in some of these things. It's like it's kind of an analogy. Only here it's the hardware people that are effectively making it so that your phone is acting as part of their network, and they're not really asking you. They're just updating it for this feature. But like it's arguable as to whether or not you want to use your device as part of a sensor network for some company delivering services to someone else.
Yeah, like it's not completely novel. Like Tile has existed for a while, and that's like the Bluetooth tag. But you had to have the Tile app downloaded, and you had to give it permission to running all the time.
That was opt-in.
Right.
This is not, as far as I'm really aware, opt-in. And that just like, if you don't want to be part of the sensor network, like how do you opt out? Like if you don't want, for example, something using your phone to ping off of you. Like,
yeah, it certainly would be more sketchy, but at the minimum, I would want to see somewhere in a menu a setting that you can toggle off.
Yeah, because like let's just say this: if I wanted to like track people, I could make a node that creates like a really common Wi-Fi network that most people have probably connected to at some point. And then if their phone connects to it, it's going to connect with their real MAC address, because that's the way most Wi-Fi currently works, unless you have like some extra settings enabled. And then I could log like the manufacturer of the device, because I have the real MAC address, that device's real MAC address. I could even beacon out some other Wi-Fi network names and figure out which networks they've connected to before. And then I could send that information encoded over like the same phone and exfiltrate that data just by virtue of it being close to a location. And then I know that particular phone, which is connected to these devices before, or these Wi-Fi networks before, and also has this MAC address, was at this location at this time. Like if you make enough of those, then you can start to track people between points, and suddenly like it's not so cute anymore.
Yeah. Well, on that
now I want to make that. now I'm going to be busy working on that.
Oh my god.
But all right, so that's all the time we have for today. Lots of really fun topics. Again, if you guys find anything interesting, you can always at me on Twitter with some of these stories, and I will include them. But if you have any questions, you can also leave them on the YouTube video, and we will answer them during our Q&A. So It's really great to go through these topics with you guys. Thank you for being on the chat. And also, if you haven't already, make sure to check out the Verona's brand channel, because with some of this dark side stuff, we also have Killian doing the threat update, and he goes through some of the more technical stuff about exactly what's going on and what companies are doing about it. So if you're curious about how some of these companies that are now in the news are dealing with it, you can check out Threat Update to find out a little bit more about what the threats look like. So yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. We will talk to you guys later. See ya.
Bye.